right, and we're back for another one.
We are back.
Yeah.
Beard is
So they're calling
strong.
for more snow tomorrow, and like we haven't had snow in a good 2 years, and I want to say about 2 to 3 inches. We got about 2 to 3 inches the other day, and just this afternoon they updated the forecast from 2 to 4 inches to 4 to 8 inches tomorrow.
Wow, that's legit snow.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get a crap ton of stuff done today so I can take some time in the middle of the day tomorrow to go out and shovel, but then also go sledding with the little guy.
Yeah, got to take advantage of that. So
Yeah. I
sounds
mean,
fun.
snow is nothing for you.
No,
Snow
it
is more
is.
of an
I
annoyance
don't
for me.
like it. It's an annoyance for me too. So I get it. Yeah, we went all of December feeling like spring, like
Hmm.
40 high 40s, like blue skies, warm, and then all of a sudden January hits and we've just been storm after storm, and it's just like I don't want to snow blow anymore. I
Yeah.
shouldn't complain. At least I don't have to shovel it by hand, but it's still an annoyance to like. Okay.
Yeah. So I haven't needed it yet. I have my dad's snowblower, but it hasn't been used in 3 years or so. And I was trying to
Mm,
get it to start the other day. It wouldn't. So I put something like that, like the fuel stabilizer in there.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes that'll help
Probably
clear
gummed
it
up
out to get.
carburetor or
Yeah. So
something.
I put that in, and I gotta go down and see if it'll start again. So I shoveled the other day, and I might be shoveling tomorrow. But like, I tried to get ahead of it and make sure the thing was working, but it's still not working yet. And now we have
Yeah.
potentially 8 inches of snow coming tomorrow.
You better get that working. You don't want to be shoveling 8 inches of snow.
Yeah. So, um, so yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a good segue when it comes to snow and our topic. So I'll just dig right in. So last week we had a conversation around conflicts of interest. Like what are they, and then specifically how are they applied to an analytics organization and the impact it can have. And today I want to continue that conversation around that and talk specifically about like what can be done to prevent an analytics practice from developing conflicts of interest. Because if you remember that conversation, we talked about we did talk a bit about like intentionally fudging numbers or
Mm-hmm.
intentionally corrupting data because of a conflict of interest. But then we started talking about the unintentional things where people don't realize that they're falling into that trap, whether it's their individual biases, relationships they have with others in the organization. And that I think really is where our conversation centered around is recognizing that, recognizing where it's unintentional because you really have to put your due diligence in to prevent from even the appearance of a conflict of interest from happening. So when I think of things, and I know when many people think of data, they think of cold hard facts. Data is data, but this can often be very inaccurate because, like many things in life, data can be skewed, biased, or even, as I mentioned a moment ago, outright corrupted intentionally. So, with everyone having a bias, and analytics teams no exception to that, what do they need to do to ensure that they're independent voice in an organization? Because that is the promise of a digital analytics organization team is to be an independent voice of the organization. What steps do they need to take to ensure that biases do not impact on a team's ability to deliver on that and prevent them from developing conflicts of interest?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a timely topic and such an important topic. And I think the very first thing that needs to be done is just to recognize that this is an important topic to talk about because we talk about so many things that impact this. We talk about what's the right org structure, where should analytics sit in the org, who should it roll up to. We have all these conversations that have a direct impact on potential, conflicts of interest, but we don't talk about it. We don't call it out and say, and because of this decision we're making, we have to be really cognizant that it could be creating conflicts of interest that we need to address. It doesn't go talked about. I don't know about you and your experience, either consulting or working client side, if you ever had this conversation come up, like that, oh, we probably should discuss our objectivity. It just seems like something we don't talk about. Yet we all know the criticality of being objective, but we don't talk about it. I'm not sure why. So I think that's the very first step, is just to call it out, to say this is something important. We're concerned about potential conflicts of interest, and due to these discussions we're having, we need to talk about the decisions we make, the impact they could have on potential conflicts of interest, and how we plan on addressing them.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I'm thinking back, and I think a lot of times it was implied, and maybe that's part of the problem, is that we know that there needs to be an unbiased nature of it. And thinking back to when I was, part of the agency arm of another company, yeah, like the idea of conflicts of interest. Well, I think there was like the boilerplate messaging on things. Like I think people really didn't didn't look into it, or didn't
Yeah,
think about it, didn't talk about it.
yeah, and again, so I think that that's the most important point, is just bubbling it up and saying we need to talk about this, we need to address it. But I started off saying this is a very timely conversation. It wasn't planned this way, but I was having a conversation around this just this morning on LinkedIn. Kind of an offshoot of a post that I published this morning about the importance of those working in data and analytics to align with business value. Um, and mostly got support on it, but one commenter pushed back, and he linked an article that another gentleman wrote, which was well written and thought out, that basically said, you know, ignore the advice that if you're in data and analytics that you need to be concerned about creating business value. That's not your job unless you're an analytics leader. It's not your job to worry about creating business value. And somehow that conversation kind of um, continued down a path where the conversation turned to distributed versus consolidated analytics teams. So, do you have a consolidated analytics team that rolls up through, and we've had conversations about where does it live, or do you have a distributed analytics team where you are part of another organization? So, Jim, you might be an analytics architect for marketing or for a specific part of a website. Say like you architect the checkout flow, but someone else architects, marketing landing pages, and someone else architects, and analyzes and etc. And the idea behind that is, well, you're closer to the business. So even if you're not personally concerned about creating business value, you're going to create business value just because you're embedded and close to the team that is doing the work that is creating that business value. And I don't want this conversation to be about the right format of teams, unified or distributed teams or whatever we want to call it. But I do want to call out one of the very, very real challenges of having distributed analytics teams. And I think we started talking about it a bit last week, that when you become embedded in a team, it is very, very difficult to maintain objectivity, because these are your peers. They become your friends. The leader of that team is your boss and is responsible for your promotions and your bonuses. And so whether consciously or subconsciously, you start to lose a grip on objectivity when you're analyzing the performance of the people that are responsible for your career and the people that have become close colleagues and friends. And that should be very concerning. I'm not saying it can't work, but if you create a distributed model where you embed your analytics teams within other business units or organizations, and you don't call out as the most potential biggest risk is this loss of objectivity because of a conflict of interest, it can be very, very dangerous. Things can spiral, and you may be left wondering what's happening because we didn't call out this as a very, very dangerous risk.
Yeah, and I've seen it not necessarily on a distributed team. I've seen it in the past where you have an analytics team, but people on that team become dedicated to certain parts of the organization or certain clients, and they do lose that objectivity. they begin to identify with the client and begin advocating for the wrong things, or they become they begin to identify with the team that they're working on and begin advocating for the team instead of advocating for the business overall.
Yeah, and I should call out that I'm coming from a place of very real bias on this because this was my experience client side. At one point in time, I reported up through the VP of marketing, and whether, again, intentional or unintentional, I felt a tremendous amount of downward pressure to make the marketing numbers look good. I was never asked directly to fudge the numbers or fake the numbers or miscalculate the numbers. I was never asked directly, but I sure did feel a lot of pressure from the top to make sure that when I presented analysis that the marketing team looked good. And that was
Yeah.
really hard for me to be in that position.
And for some reason today, certain memories have been spurred from like 15 years ago when I was part of an organization. And a few particular clients came back to mind, as well as a few individuals. Like I can think of one individual in particular who was on the analytics team, but was dedicated to a particular platform. And in that case, made them dedicated to a particular group of people within the organization. And she identified with them and not with the team in general. So when changes were made on the team and support for that platform was it was decided that the team would no longer own this. The team was like, we there's a long history, but the team was never supposed to own this platform. And when it finally came down to, we don't have the budget to own this, this is not what this team is supposed to be doing. And the decision was to pivot away from that. It was, she had a very, very hard time moving away from it because she identified purely with that. And even with the transition period, like it was like by, over the next 3 months, we're moving away from this. It is that other group's responsibility to find the budget, find the resources for that. We're moving away from it. And this is what we're going to do. And it was tough, and I'm not doing it justice because I can't give too many more details than that, but it's that idea of I starting to identify with a particular group where then your decisions become tainted, they become biased. And I'm trying not to overuse the word bias here, but you if an analytics team is supposed to be independent, objective, and delivering information for the business, when you become that attached, it's human nature to to identify with the group you're with.
Yeah,
Does that make
and
sense?
it absolutely does, and these are things that happen, and they happen all the time. And I don't think the goal is to rid ourselves of these biases and conflicts of interest, and in some cases, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are some very firm lines where you don't want to create specific conflicts of interest, but I think in most cases it's not being done deliberately. It's being, I think it's done because it is a human nature thing. We do want to feel part of this group. We do want to support them. We have these strong emotions and connections, and subconsciously we're allowing that need or desire to impact our objectivity. As analysts, that's always going to be the case. Like, we are not going to rid ourselves of biases and these challenges, but we have to be comfortable calling it out, saying, I know this is a risk, and because of that, I'm going to put A, B, and C in place in order to prevent it from, impacting my ability to do my job in an objective way. And I think that there are a few, and I think you kind of called them out, like the critical things that we need to be aware of is that when we're in a situation, our biases and potential risk to that objectivity, which creates this conflict of interest, typically come in two or three different forms. A big one, obviously, is financial. So if my livelihood or my ability to move up the corporate ladder or get bonuses is tied to the data that I collect or present, that's instantly an area where we're going to have a conflict. And again, the goal isn't necessarily to completely remove that conflict, because we're never going to remove every conflict and every potential risk to objectivity. The goal too is identify where there are risks and put in remediation plans and plans to make sure that even with those risks, we're going to move forward in a way that we can maintain as much as our objectivity as possible. And if we don't, again, financial is a huge motivator. And we see it all the time, right? Of people making unethical decisions with data and fudging numbers in order to get financial gain. And so we
Real
may not
quick,
have.
like just one thing, just people probably don't realize that they're doing, and we mentioned it so many times. Just with that, we talk about data. We're not even talking about web data here.
Yeah.
Timesheets.
Uh huh.
We've mentioned it all the time. Timesheets. It's like if you think, oh, this person's an analyst, they're going to deliver the data in an unbiased way. Well, look at people with timesheets. If bonuses, if just remaining employed is determined by data that someone can control in the form of a timesheet, which is supposed to be, hey, I worked on this for this long.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that other things aren't going to be as influenced.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, this affects every aspect of data, and data is everywhere. And whether you're an analyst or not, there are these conflicts of interest. And again, I think the key topic of this conversation is not trying to do away with those conflicts, but admitting that they exist and coming up with a plan to make sure you're not allowing those things that are just human nature to cause you to cross over ethical lines, to cross over legal lines, because you can do it. It's a very slippery slope. You think, we're just fudging this, we're just fudging that. And before you know it, you're trying to admit why making an unethical decision wasn't that bad. Or, well, I know that was illegal, but here's what I was thinking. It happens all the time.
It's small. It's small. No one's going to notice. It's fine.
It's a fraction of a penny. No
Yeah.
one's gonna notice. They're gonna notice, Peter. This is a lot of money. Yeah, yeah. So I think it's just important to be cognizant of the fact that there are these motivators that cause us to lose objectivity and push us toward that conflict of interest. Money is a huge one. So whether that's career advancement or bonus or raises, remaining employed, as you mentioned, we just have to call it out and say, this is a risk. How are we going to address it? And then emotional appeal that you mentioned, like, these are my friends. I want to remain friends with them. I want to be, involved in the group. I want to be trusted. I want to be one of them. So, maybe I'll just look the other way on those numbers that were bad. Or maybe I'll just slightly change a calculation so it looks a little better than it is. It's real easy to do, and it happens when that appeal to emotion is there and is kind of pressing on you. So I think addressing those two things is just super, super critical. And again, it affects every aspect, but there are things where that becomes much more tangible, and it begs for an even stronger response. So we started the conversation around, where does analytics live? If you're going to distribute your teams and Jim's going to live in, I'll just pick on marketing again, and you report to the VP of marketing, we have to address the fact that there's a financial motivation there and there's an emotional motivation there that is going to really test your resolve to remain objective. And the business needs you to be objective. So how are we going to account for this? And have some very tough conversations, because can you imagine how tough of a conversation that would be as an analyst reporting to the VP of marketing, to sit down with the VP and say, I'm really, really worried what's going to happen if there comes a time where I have to report that a campaign that we did not perform very well. I'm worried that you're going to take that personally, and that's going to affect my ability to be promoted or my ability to get a raise. How are we going to handle that? That sounds like a really scary conversation.
I had a thought and I just lost it.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, ask me one.
Let's say that the shoe was on the proverbial other foot. Let's say you're running finance. You're the CFO, and analytics reports up to you, or you have an embedded analyst in your team. How would you as a leader proactively, so you don't put the pressure on your analyst, how would you as a proactive leader that has high ethical standards, that wants objectivity from your analyst so you can perform at the highest level, how would you approach your team and let them know that you understand that there's these potential areas of conflict, and emotion and financial motivators are a huge one that could destroy objectivity? How would you put your team at ease?
Yeah, I think we called something out earlier because as I thought back throughout my career in various positions I've been in, it's there was always this assumption that this conversation has taken place, or the assumption that people were aware of this and made decisions based on it, made the proper decisions based on it. But as I think about it, I'm like, you know what? This might be one of those things where we just assume, or if there's any conversation, it's through the form of the boilerplate corporate training. What is a conflict of interest? And, you should know not to share this information. Or if you're at this level and you're getting this level of information before quarterly earnings, you need to know what this means. But to your point, it's the conversations about where else it can exist, and kind of having that look back we had earlier. I think the first thing I would call out is that if we're going to be a team that holds ourselves to a high ethical standard, honesty needs to come before anything else. It's, like, deliver the bad news first and make sure you're honest about it. And believe me, it sounds easy to say that, but it's very, very hard.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just having, like, just being as keeping it as simple and blunt as possible. Because I think with these conversations we sometimes overcomplicate them, and with this it's just to put someone at ease, it's just be simple about it. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
if you're delivering bad news and you're honest about it and you're not trying to obfuscate or hide anything, then it's not going to put your job at risk.
Yeah, and I think you brought up, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, a really important point, that maybe it's starting as simple as just having the conversation so your team feels heard and validated. Like, we may not have all the answers on how to remove these conflicts. We may not have all the answers on how to address potential loss of objectivity. But maybe it's enough, at least to start, to say, I'm worried about this and I hear you. Because right now that's not happening. And it's not happening the other way because as an employee, as an analyst, like, I feel worried about having to have that conversation with a superior, so I'd just rather not have it. Doesn't mean I don't stress about it and worry about it. And so as a leader, simply having that conversation of saying, look, I don't have all the answers on how we address this, but I realize this is a concern and I hear you. Maybe that's the right way to at least start the conversation. Your team feels heard and they understand that this is something that is concerning. We may not have the answers, but now that we've kind of put that uneasy conversation on the table, maybe it becomes a little less scary for us to say, let's work together to figure out how we can, again, not remove every potential conflict, but ensure we put some meaningful guardrails in place so that we can at least protect our objectivity where we have known risks, within the way that we have our organization structured.
And to what we talked a bit about last week is sometimes these things can happen without someone realizing it.
Oh, all
Like,
the time.
a lot of what we're talking about is not the people that intentionally do it. It's the people that fall into a trap or fall into something, and before they realize it, they're stuck in a situation that they didn't intend to be in. This is all the unintentional stuff that people, if they're not careful about, can fall into. Maybe also part of it is just calling it out that, hey, working in this position, doing this in this part of the organization, You're going to be pulled this way. You're going to feel yourself pulled. Recognize it and realize that, you're going to need to put up guardrails to prevent yourself from being pulled in that direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, I think having the conversation is a huge step forward from what's happening today. Because again, as a practitioner, that never happened. In like 5 years as a practitioner, reporting to maybe 8 different bosses, that conversation never happened. And sure, I can take some of the blame in that I should have pushed the conversation. I take it back. It happened once, and I've shared it on the podcast. And maybe not directly, but it was the time the CEO pulled me into the office and said, Jason, if at least once a month I'm not hearing from someone on the team that you're mean and they're mad at you, then you're not doing your job. So I think indirectly he was saying to me, look, as being an objective analyst that I need you to be, you're going to ruffle some feathers every now and then. You're going to upset some people because you're going to shine a light on performance. It's not a rebuke of them as a person. It's just a analysis of the work. And that's going to upset people. So if I'm not hearing every once in a while that someone's mad at you, then I'm worried that you're losing your objectivity. So he didn't say it directly, but he said it. So I'll give the credit that happened in that instance. But I never reported to the CEO. From a direct kind of boss perspective, we never sat down and had that conversation and said, I'm worried that, you have so many friends on, the front end development team. I'm worried that you have friends on the UX team. I'm worried that you may lose objectivity when evaluating, our website's flow. But let's talk about it. Never happened. And I don't think that my experience is unique. I just don't think that is a very popular conversation to have. I just don't see it happening.
No, and yeah, as I've thought back too, it's like the only time I really think about it was just the more of the generic corporate training on conflicts of interest, and nothing specific to the work that the team is doing.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's it. I think
Yeah.
if if we think about like what could be done to prevent an analytics team or an analytics practice from developing conflicts of interest, I think it's just calling it out, bringing it
Yeah.
to light that this can happen. And while you may have the best of intentions and do not plan to intentionally deceive anybody, you could be pulled
Mm-hmm.
through one way or another into something that you don't want to be in.
Yeah. And again, I think it's more common than we are comfortable admitting. Um, in that, I think a lot of the times it's not intentional, it's not malicious. It's just part of human nature and our motives and desires that we get pulled into those directions where we lose objectivity, um, and we may not even realize it. So I think you're right, and I'm glad we kind of came to that conclusion. Is that really the most important thing? Is just calling it out, saying this is a thing that exists, and we don't know how to fully solve for it, but we need to start by just calling it out and saying this exists, because no one's having that conversation today. Very few are having that conversation today.
Yeah. And I'll go back to where I've started this is people just assume data and reports that are delivered are just unbiased, and it's not. Data can be easily influenced. Data can be easily manipulated to get any kind of result. You know,
Absolutely.
you know, 14% of all people know that you can get whatever result you want from data.
Yeah, I mean, I think 9 out of 10 respondents would agree with that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of another comeback, but it's just not coming to me.
But there is an actual article that talks about that.
Well, it's also a
And
Simpsons quote.
is it okay?
Yeah, it's
The,
like I have to find it now, but it's like like something or other. Yeah, 14% of all people know that.
There's an actual article that breakdown of the toothpaste one, the 4 out of 5 dentists recommend. There's a
Yeah.
breakdown of how that's like fudging the numbers in unethical ways to like put that on there. So yeah.
Hold on.
Sorry,
Gotta find this.
I missed the Simpsons quote.
Yeah. Yeah. People can come up with statistics to prove anything. 14% of all people know that.
You got the 14% right.
I did get the 14. I didn't get the exact line right, but it's great. It's an early season. It's like one of the early seasons, and Homer's being interviewed on TV, and it's like Kent Brockman's throwing statistics at him, and like, oh, people can come up with statistics for anything.
I'm totally still in that. That's good. That's a good LinkedIn post.
Yeah. All right. So
All right.
as we wrap up, like I don't have anything more to add. I think this was a good conversation to kind of work through, and yeah, I think sometimes when you come into these episodes of like, well, what can someone do to do this, and what can someone do to do that? I think if anything, there's really only one thing. It's to call it out, bring it to light, and at least have the conversation.
Yep, absolutely. That's
Because
the starting point for sure.
yeah, because it is a very real thing, and as we talk, I keep thinking of more and more, episodes from my past
I thought you were
where,
gonna say of
in
The
one way or
Simpsons.
another, what's that?
I thought you were gonna say of The Simpsons.
No, episodes from my past where, yeah, like when people were dedicated to a client, people were dedicated to it, no, to another team in the organization, they unintentionally identified with that team, which led them to advocate for that team specifically instead of being an independent voice for the organization on the value of that team.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there for this week. I'm trying to think of another Simpsons quote to lead us out, but it's not coming to me. So we'll just wrap it up there and talk to everybody later.
See ya.
See ya.